The Responders are a volunteer disaster relief organization operating in Appalachia. Formed shortly after the Great War by local first responder units, they were dedicated to helping local communities survive. To this end, they instituted a variety of programs that ranged from basic outdoor survival training to a specialized combat division called the Fire Breathers. Like the other regional factions, the original Responders were wiped out by the scorched plague. Several years later, those who reclaimed Appalachia began to reform the Responders. A desire to revive the group began with Heather Ellis in Flatwoods. Later, in 2104, the Responders group re-established itself in the White Spring Resort, led by Rucker. In the aftermath of the Great War, first responders in Appalachia mobilized to help their fellow citizens. Eventually becoming a unified group known as the Responders, they encompassed government and crisis relief duties in Appalachia, providing automated survival training to those who needed it. Their goals included helping people who made it through the nuclear holocaust or were born after the dust had settled, as surviving in the post-war world became paramount. They set up numerous locations across West Virginia in a bid to establish some semblance of law and order. The West Virginian capital of Charleston became the heart of Appalachian Reconstruction with the Responders at the forefront, the city itself showing great promise of rebuilding in the aftermath of the Great War. Among these refugees desperate for help were those from the Pleasant Valley Ski Resort, far away in the Savage Divide. Left without help, they banded together under one David Thorpe. Thorpe rallied them into what would be the first of the region's Raider warbands, and what would soon be a major threat to the Responders' mission. Weathering post-war hardships, the Responders held steady, despite the new threat of the Raiders. The city of Charleston grew with its success and proved to be a safe haven against Raider attacks. However, that was to change by 2082. A raiding party led by Rosalind Jeffries, David Thorpe's lover, was routed handily by the Responders, despite some casualties. Most importantly, some raiders were captured alive, Rosalind among them. With a powerful bargaining chip, the Responders hoped that they could negotiate some sort of ceasefire in exchange for their prisoners. Thorpe, on the other hand, was convinced that Rosalind was dead. In a sheer display of cruelty, on Christmas morning, the Summersville Dam was rigged with mini nukes on Thorpe's order. The subsequent destruction of the dam resulted in catastrophic flooding that killed countless Responders, refugees, and other innocents. The survivors resettled at the Morgantown airport. Despite the devastation, the Responders did not give up. Morgantown proved to be a jackpot, as after containing the trouble with the local gangs, they had a centrally located base, distance between them and the nearest Raider clans in the mountains, and contact with the Free States and the Appalachian Brotherhood of Steel. They also expanded into Flatwoods and began restarting some of the old infrastructures in the town to produce food and provide security. Their access to food, medicine, and other essential supplies was the foundation of their relationship with the Free States and the Brotherhood, with caravans crossing through the Savage Divide regularly. 4 years after the flood, in January 2086, they reached the apex of their power and influence as they fought against the super mutants in Huntersville alongside power-armored troops of Paladin Taggarty. The victory seemed to signal the beginning of a new era for Appalachia, as the Responders and Brotherhood forged an alliance, and their patrols even managed to suppress the mountain raiders. Sanjay Kumar and Miguel Caldera were indispensable for maintaining the fleet and keeping it operational. However, things would not go their way. The enclave, hidden away from prying eyes, split apart in the Civil War after President Thomas Eckhart decided to have his way and forced the automated security systems to raise the DEFCON level by releasing scorch beasts on Appalachia, after subjecting it to Chinese drones, the Huntersville mutants, and other monstrosities. The civil war that destroyed the faction set the scorch beasts loose, which rapidly infested the Cranberry Bog and started spreading out into the adjacent areas. The appearance of the scorched was a shock to all survivors who came into contact with them, as was the plague they spread. The Responders decided to fight back, organizing a special fighting force called the Fire Breathers, using the experience of Melody Larkin and Hank Madigan, a Brotherhood deserter, to train and organize the elite fighters. They would face the horrors of the wasteland and protect the lands west of Appalachia from the scorched, encountering strange, hostile creatures along the way. However, the responders failed to consider the big picture. Maria Chavez, their de facto leader, did not believe the threat was as severe as the Brotherhood made it out to be, and disliked their militarism and repeated demands for supplies. What just a few years earlier promised to be a long-lasting alliance was unraveling fast, culminating on March 12, 2095, when the Brotherhood demanded information about Amy Carey's project, at gunpoint. Although Chavez relented, the relations were soured permanently. The fall of the Brotherhood in August 2095 left the responders alone on the board, and it was a matter of time until the scorched beasts finally took them out. The raiders, desperately fleeing the savage divide, swept through the forest, taking out many of the responder outposts, including Flatwoods. The research project into a scorched vaccine at AVR Medical Center was launched too late to provide a cure in time to protect the fire breathers. By September 2096, all of the pieces were in place to create it, but communications breakdowns due to constant scorched attacks prevented Dr. Hudson from completing it, and the fire breathers were forced to launch their operation to seal the Big Bend Tunnel and buy time for Appalachia without it. The operation took place in late October and failed. So did Hank Madigan on his attempt to establish the scorched detection system developed in conjunction with the Free States, captured and killed by the raiders. Finally, Morgantown Airport fell after a desperate defense against hordes of scorched beasts and their minions on November 7, 2096. The responders were wiped out. By 2103, however, as people came back to Appalachia, Heather Ellis, who had returned with the settlers, moved to Flatwoods, discovered the history of the responders, and decided to revive the group and their efforts by becoming one herself, continuing to live in Flatwoods with her dog Chloe, and wearing the responders' paramedic jumpsuit to show her support to revive the group. Another woman, Tiffany Brantley, decided to join the elite fire breathers, and is with vendor Bot Mac and the firefighter Protectrons at the Charleston Fire Department, already suited up in her fire breather uniform, currently stuck on having to take the exam. Around 2104, a woman named Rucker returned to Appalachia and found some of these people wearing the responders' uniform. Rucker researched the history of the original responders by finding people who could tell her about the old group and expressed a desire to truly reform the responders. Rucker helped the ideals of the original responders grow, reviving the faction and eventually needing to set up a permanent base. With waves of refugees coming to Appalachia, the new responders needed a large place suitable to treating and housing the refugees. They eventually established themselves at the seemingly abandoned White Spring Resort, turning it into a refuge. After setting up shop, they received the assistance of the enigmatic Orlando, who claims to be a liaison between the resort's management and the responders. During this time, the new responders also managed to find and repair a vertibird, which allowed them to explore and help the regions outside of the Appalachian wasteland. One of the first groups they contacted were the Union, a group of survivors found in the ruins of Pittsburgh, now known as the Pit, following the Great War. Orlando and the management provided the responders with ultracells as fuel to fly the vertibird. The original responders had a decentralized horizontal structure designed to address the needs of people under their care and aid them in need. Regular supply trains were established between the nearby farms and the responder headquarters, with full members assigned to their protection, such as Jerry Abernathy. For rapid response in emergencies, the responders also established an emergency response team, trained by Felix Odell and consisting of Derek Castle, guard and escort, Veronica Chang, and Kevin Trager, field medics. In the early years, responders largely operated under their pre-existing chains of command: police, paramedics, firefighters, etc., ignoring attempts by the Charleston emergency government to assert their leadership over them. However, this early structure was far from unified and required a good deal of tact and diplomacy to keep them from falling apart. This problem was exposed less than a year after the war, when the responders grappled with the problem of Chief Mayfield's heavy-handed rule of Morgantown. After he ordered his police officers to open fire on the rebellious VTU students and imposed a mandatory curfew, Melody Larkin realized that moving on him would risk splitting law enforcement responders from the organization. After relocating operations to Morgantown Airport, the faction was effectively guided by 5 senior members: Maria Chavez, senior responder and de facto leader; Claire Hudson, chief medical officer; Sanjay Kumar, chief engineer; Melody Larkin, combat trainer; and Jeff Nakamura, quartermaster. However, the division of labor was handled on a merit basis, with the senior responders working together with junior members. The Fire Breathers Combat Unit was a notable exception, operating with a strict chain of command under Melody, as a matter of necessity. The reformed responders at the White Spring Refuge are decentralized much in the same way as the original group was, with their main focus being on helping others. Rucker, who led the effort to revive the group, is de facto in charge of the new responders, though she rejects being labeled as a singular leader. The reformed responders at the White Spring Refuge are never mentioned as having any specific divisions or subgroups. However, they are aware of their former presence at Flatwoods and Heather Ellis's membership in the responders, and consider Flatwoods to be an active outpost. They also occasionally send members to other locations in Appalachia, and many are thankful for not being assigned to dangerous locales, like Morgantown Airport. The original Brotherhood of Steel tried to recruit skilled responders away to join the fledgling Appalachian chapter, with Hank Madigan eventually deserting the chapter for the responders himself. The organization did not have the equipment or expertise that came with being a former military unit like the Brotherhood, as much of their equipment came from their origins as civilian emergency services, meaning members of that caliber were both needed and in short supply. Like the Brotherhood, the responders fought against the encroaching scorched, and also researched a means to develop a vaccine against the scorched plague, but their efforts ultimately fell short, and they were wiped out sometime before Vault 76 opened. There is evidence of a responders' radio station that operated prior to the group's destruction. The responders also collaborated to some extent with the Free States, such as through aiding the residents of Harper's Ferry before and after the Free States' arrival in the town. After they rebuilt Harper's Ferry, they also created a trade route to Charleston in the hopes of furthering their relations with the responders. The reformed responders allow a settler representative from Foundation and a raider representative from the Crater to reside within the White Spring Refuge. They are friendly with the settlers, but many members are distrustful of the raiders, to the point of outright rejecting those who even associate with the raiders. They appear to be somewhat neutral towards the Brotherhood 1st Expeditionary Force at Fort Atlas, and Initiate Ellison is present at the refuge as a representative of the group. Ellison privately believes the responders would be better off being absorbed by the Brotherhood, who have more resources available to them. Senior responder Maria E. Chavez was a pre-war paramedic and one of the leaders of the original responders, a faction that formed out of the first responders of Appalachia in the wake of the Great War. Comprised of former military, police, medical personnel, and firefighters, the responders controlled much of the forest region in West Virginia, cooperating with the Charleston emergency government until its destruction, then as a standalone force under Chavez's leadership. Disagreements between the Brotherhood and Chavez's responders contributed to the destruction of both factions and brief domination of the scorched in the region. The responders would eventually be revived by Rucker, succeeding Chavez 8 years after the original responders were wiped out. Maria's corpse could previously be found in the responders' command post inside the Morgantown Airport terminal. However, as of the Wastelanders update, the spot has been replaced with Dontrell Haynes Memorial to the responders. Wartime supply shortages of critical medicines drove up prices to the point that little Maria's mother couldn't afford them on her salary. Her mother dealt with the issue using her gardening talents, cultivating a garden with herbs and flowers she used to create herbal remedies. Continuing her mother's trade, Chavez eventually became a paramedic with an appreciation of naturopathic medicine. After the Great War, Chavez became one of the founders of the responders. She first participated in the recovery efforts undertaken by the police, firefighters, and medical services, loosely cooperating with the Charleston emergency government that declared a state of emergency across the Appalachian territories to deal with the chaos wrought by the nuclear war. However, with Governor Evans gone, caused by an imminent probe into embezzlement of public funds before the war, and political competition between Speaker Poole and Majority Whip Holbrook, the first responders were forced to rely on their own initiative and judgment, pretending to follow orders of the CEG. By 2082, the responders were the de facto government for Charleston. Chavez focused on medicine, especially finding alternatives to the dwindling supply of pre-war medicine. A trip to her mother's workplace, the AVR Medical Center, rekindled her interest in naturopathic medicine and seek alternative cures made from flora present in Appalachia. A similar sentiment would lead the followers of the apocalypse to embark on a similar research project on the other side of the continent. She also handled other salvaging and coordinating with Jeff Nakamura on recovering dynamite from Gauley Mine and keeping tabs on Vault 76 through monthly scouting runs. She assigned them to responders like one Paul, with the stipulation to avoid danger and return after a few days of observation. Everything changed with the Christmas flood in Christmas 2082. The attack by David Thorpe destroyed the city, killing thousands, and wiping out most of the responders. The responders weren't completely destroyed, as they've been already expanding northwards across the Allegheny Plateau, securing a trade route with the emerging free states, and setting up a volunteer outpost shortly after the Great War in Flatwoods. Maria avoided death in the flood together with a handful of senior members, and resolved to rebuild the responders, although many doubted such a thing would be even possible. Under her leadership, the responders moved to Morgantown Airport, restarting their efforts to help the people of Appalachia. Strong-willed and dedicated, Maria slowly built up the responders from almost nothing over the next decade, as a volunteer-based organization focusing on healing and teaching people how to survive. Chavez was not a fan of violence or combat, but under Melody Larkin's persuasion, she allocated resources to help Larkin form the Fire Breathers, a long-range rescue unit intended for operations in the devastated ash heap. The Breathers would use the Charleston ruins as a training area and staging ground for operations deep within the hostile, devastated regions of the heap, seeking survivors in Welch, Beckley, Bramwell, and other communities the responders were unable to reach. Expanding northward into the Toxic Valley, the responders re-established contact with Elizabeth Taggarty's Brotherhood of Steel and the Free States, lost after the Charleston flood. Although Chavez and Taggarty had trouble cooperating, one was a civilian healer, the other a military killer, the problems weren't serious at first. The Brotherhood's expanding presence led to a post at Grafton Dam, opened a safe route through the Savage Divide into the mire, keeping the raiders at bay, and reopening relations with the Free States and Harper's Ferry, which by early 2084 became a burgeoning settlement on the frontier. This connection also led to knowledge sharing. Ella Ames collaborated with Maria on ghoul research, after the first of them began appearing at the edges of survivor communities. 2086 represented the high watermark for Chavez, responders, and Appalachia in general. The Huntersville supermutants became a persistent threat to the region, leading to an alliance between the responders and the Brotherhood. In May 2086, their alliance culminated in the Battle of Huntersville and the elimination of supermutants from the area, as well as containment of the Raider menace. The alliance was broken up by a confluence of factors. The first was a marked shift in mission profile, imposed by Elder Roger Maxson, who mandated securing and isolating dangerous technologies that could threaten the recovering humanity if used irresponsibly. To the outside, it seemed like arbitrary confiscations, especially after Taggarty promptly abandoned Grafton Dam and reallocated troops to follow her new orders. Secondly, the scorched beasts. Already seen as early as 2084, when they started breaking out of Enclave containment, they were unleashed on the region in full force by President Eckhart in his bid to force a DEFCON change and access the Appalachian Automated Launch System in early 2085. By 2086, the scorched beasts became a major threat, spreading rapidly through the Cranberry Bog. With the Enclave self-destructed in a brief but violent civil war, the Brotherhood stepped up to defend Appalachia, setting up a security perimeter around the bog and installing ASAM batteries on its borders, after Harper's Ferry fell to the scorched plague. The Brotherhood turned to the responders for resources to maintain the containment campaign. This caused a major rift between Chavez and Taggarty, as the insistent demands for resources mounted without a clear explanation as to why, while Taggarty's military mindset led to frustration on her part. The fragile alliance that seemed to be on the brink of re-establishing new order in Appalachia in 2086 swiftly unraveled. Free states returned to their bunkers to work on their own solutions for the scorched threat. The Brotherhood of Steel continued a doomed war of attrition, while the responders tried to tend to the survivors west of the Allegheny Mountains as best they could, despite persistent raider and wildlife attacks. Demands for resources and supplies on Taggarty's part intensified, putting her at odds with Chavez, especially as 2092 marked the 10th anniversary of the Christmas flood, which killed thousands at the whim of a man used to taking things by force. Chavez failed to realize the severity of the scorched threat, believing that the responders had a duty to the people under their care and should allocate their resources accordingly, and implored her fellow responders to consider whether they should entertain Taggarty's demands or help the people under her care. Meanwhile, the Brotherhood situation worsened, and in July 2093, Taggarty ordered an immediate cessation of recruitment and training, devoting all resources to the war with the scorch beasts. The Brotherhood's routine requisitions of food, ammunition, and other essentials burned through goodwill fast, straining supply lines as early as January 2094. Chavez did not believe in taking anything by force, instead relying on mutually beneficial agreements and trade, respecting the independence of all involved. For example, though the responders desired Amy Carey's expertise in environmental sciences and made repeated entreaties, she respected Carey's desire for independence and instead struck an agreement with her to exchange data for supplies. This became a catalyst for the ultimate breaking down of relations with the Brotherhood. After Operation Touchdown was launched on January 28, 2095, leading to the loss of Paladin Taggarty and some of the most veteran members of the Brotherhood remnants under Senior Knight Wilson became desperately aggressive. When an envoy learned about Carey's environmental project, he became interested in it. Fearing consequences for Carey and confiscation of her work, Chavez misdirected them at first, and finally relented on March 12, 2095, when the Brotherhood demanded information about the project at gunpoint. The relations were permanently soured, but the Brotherhood's cryptic broadcast that defiance has fallen in August 2095 raised Chavez's worries. She sent responder Tammy through the Savage Divide in order to reach Abigail Singh at her bunker and learn what happened to the Brotherhood, and more importantly, what was coming for the responders. The first wave were raiders pushed out of the mountains by the encroaching Scorched, fleeing for their lives. The second were the Scorched themselves, steadily spreading across Appalachia over the mountain passes, and in particular the Big Bend Tunnel connecting the bog with the ash heap. Chavez realized the severity of the threat too late and asked Claire Hudson to try and find a cure. By July 6, 2096, the research team of one was set up in the basement of the AVR Medical Center and began research on August 1st, working with what few responders were available to unlock the secret of the scorched plague. Meanwhile, Chavez and Larkin prepared the fire breathers for a daring attack on Big Bend, to seal it and stem the tide of scorched coming into western Appalachia. One group even managed to penetrate AVR. However, despite months of efforts, shortages of critical supplies and blood samples from creatures necessary to create the vaccine halted her project. Chavez and Larkin cleared the operation regardless, sending the fire breathers out in late October 2096. Like Touchdown, the operation failed. The Scorch Beasts and the Scorched had no organized opposition before them and descended on Morgantown Airport. On November 7, 2096, the sky was full of the monsters, with Maria Chavez sending a last transmission to Hudson at AVR and joined the rest of the responders in their last stand. Without the firepower of the Brotherhood, the resilience of the Free States, and even the ruthless resourcefulness of the raiders, the responders stood alone and failed. Chavez coordinated the defense from the command post inside the Morgantown Airport terminal and was among the last to fall after recording her last words. Her body remained at the terminal for the next 7 years, mummifying in the conditions of post-apocalypse Appalachia. After the emergence of Vault 76 dwellers in 2102, her final plea led to the completion of the vaccine project and eventual defeat of the plague and the scorched beasts. The subsequent return of humans to Appalachia in 2103 also led to her earning a well-deserved final rest. Dontrell Haynes cleaned up the Morgantown Responders Command Center, giving Chavez a burial and erecting a small memorial to her. A greater memorial was erected by Rucker, who re-established the responders at the White Spring Resort, creating a refuge for people in need from all over Appalachia in 2104, carrying Chavez's torch on into the darkness.